Hello. It's a great privilege to have a few minutes of time to think together about sharing the gospel in an academic setting. I don't claim to be an expert. I just am trying to do this and have been trying for some time. I finished my PhD in 2016 and have been a postdoc since then. I'd say my main ministry isn't personal evangelism, but public apologetic talks. And I have been fortunate to see people come to faith through these, both directly and indirectly. And so I think evangelism covers a whole spectrum of different activities that we might do where we're proclaiming the goodness of God. I'm glad that Professor Green already mentioned this idea of us being priests and kings, and this comes up a few times throughout the Bible. I find this verse helpful in thinking about our role as Christians in the world, whether that be academic or otherwise. Peter says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us." And in this talk, I'll try and touch on these two aspects of declaring the praises of God and living lives that also glorify God. So very basically, I think our identity as Christians informs our behavior, obviously, and in two key ways I want to explore that. Our identity as priests somehow connects with our task of proclaiming the praises of God, and our identity as a holy nation of God's own people ties in with the idea of living above reproach, such that any opposition to us might be silenced. And altogether, this is the academic task of the Christian task of witness in the academy. My research might seem incredibly distant from this. How could I connect my everyday research as a scientist to these very, perhaps abstract theological ideas? What is my research? Well, I'm interested in bacteria and viruses and various other organisms and the laws by which they work and the laws by which they change across time. So I would say I'm working out some of the principles that underlie evolutionary processes, the God-given laws of life. And that's the framework within which I conduct my research, which I think ties in nicely to this idea of the excellencies of God, or some translations of the verse in 1 Peter say the excellencies of God or the praises of God. One dimension of this, I think, is declaring the excellencies of God in creation. This is what we see in Revelation 4. Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who's seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who's seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, "Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." So one aspect of the goodness of God is his goodness in creation. And this is something that I think we basically study in the natural sciences. There's also the goodness of God in redemption in Revelation 5, speaking to Jesus, the Lamb. "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God." So there's the excellencies of God in creation and the excellencies of God in redemption. And very simplistically, very broadly, I think it's helpful to see the natural sciences as giving opportunities to explore the theological truth of the excellency of God in creation, and the humanities as maybe giving some more opportunities to talk about the excellencies of God in redemption. And in the humanities we deal with moral issues and social issues and persons made in the image of God. And I think we needn't explicitly frame it in those terms in order to do this academic work. I think this is a helpful framework for us to have kind of behind the scenes and sometimes to draw out when it's appropriate. But there is a true framework about the world that informs the way that we do our research, and also informs the way in which that research might help us to point people to Christ. So the main point of my talk was to give some practical examples of how this might look in the academic context. And two categories of this. The first is living well and showing proper respect, which comes up in that passage in 1 Peter. And the second is declaring the praises of God. So the first category, just a really practical thing, is I think being involved in some kind of Christian community that's connected to your workplace is really helpful. So they provide unique encouragements, opportunities, and I've just put the image of the one that I'm involved in at the Genome campus where I work. So we have a group of 40 or 50 people who are connected in some way, who meet weekly. A few of us will meet weekly. I'll just join. Weekly is quite a large commitment, so I join every 2 or 3 weeks, and that's kind of standard for the group. And we're in communication on our Slack channel, where we have an email list. We occasionally run events for the wider campus that might be of interest to the campus from a Christian perspective. In terms of Christian community that's connected to my work, I'm also part of a couple of networks of Christian academics. One is the FOIA network that I think has been mentioned here before, and another is a network that's based in Israel. And they're both really helpful, just being connected to some people who are a bit more senior in their academic life, and thinking through how that might shape my research and the way I go about this. If you have any questions about this, feel free to talk with me later. I'd be very keen to help you think about what this might look like. I wanted to ask you, who here knows another Christian, either in their department or in a building near to where they work? If you could just raise your hand. Yeah, so the large majority of people, which means that there is an opportunity to maybe meet together once a month or once a fortnight for prayer and encouragement. In Cambridge, there are groups based at Addenbrooke's. There's, I think, a couple of groups there. My wife, Anka, runs a group at the Institute of Astronomy. There's various groups in companies and groups of companies located near each other, science parks, and at the Genome campus where I work. I've been told the Postgrad Initiative would be very interested in helping you if you'd like to form one of those kinds of groups. Now, 2 ways in which I think academics can show respect that I think is kind of practically useful. One is respect so-called downwards in the academic hierarchy. If you're a graduate student, then who's kind of below you on the standard academic hierarchy? Well, undergrad students have less power and influence than you do. Professional services staff or administrative staff also have less power and often are shown less respect than they deserve as image bearers. So I think one kind of fairly obvious aspect of Christian distinctiveness should be respect to those who have less power or authority or control. And then also we can show respect upwards in the hierarchy. A really practical way would be to really respect your supervisor if you're a PhD student. Try and make life easier for them rather than harder for them. Try and follow their suggestions. Put in the time required. That might mean saying no to ministry opportunities. I think this is a really hard tension for a lot of Christian PhD students. I actually wish I'd done less ministry as a PhD student and focused a bit more on my studies. That would have been better and a better witness and more faithful to the calling that I had. But it is a really tricky balance to work through. Okay, so you could say a lot about that, but I want to move on to the next kind of category of living as a Christian in the academy, which is proclaiming the excellencies of God. So one dimension of this is the way that you do your research, or the the kind of research that you do. And as you kind of gain academic independence, maybe as a postdoc or an independent fellow, or then as a lecturer or assistant professor or such, you get more and more opportunities to shape the direction that your research takes. And it is possible, in many cases, to direct your research and its interpretation to ends which in some way explore the excellencies of God. This needs to be done with care, and I'd recommend in taking feedback from others in your field who are Christian or in adjacent fields. It won't be common that your research is actually labeled this way, but it doesn't stop you doing it this way. One of the great things about academia is we have a lot of freedom often in what we research and what we spend our time in. So maybe there are opportunities within your field to direct your research in a way which is fruitful in this sense. So in my particular case, just as a concrete example, I'm really interested in evolutionary questions and motivated to do that for practical reasons. Like many of my colleagues, I think there will be useful applications. I think there are important questions that are worth answering, but also because I'm driven to do this by my belief in the truth that God is the creator of everything. So I don't think there's anything illegitimate in having that Christian motivation for doing the research that I do. And I think it actually makes me a better researcher in my field. Another area where our academic life and Christian faith can intersect really usefully is just the general academic profile that you have. How do your colleagues think of you? How do your kind of more distant collaborators or those in your field, what's the kind of reputation that you have? What are you interested in? What motivates you? You can develop that in a way which is more clearly Christian. So maybe you can be exploring the kind of questions that overlap more naturally with Christian issues. So maybe if you're a scientist, you can develop some interest and thoughts around how God and science might interact. The history of your discipline will often be fruitful in thinking about how theology may connect. General issues of how do people flourish in academia? What does it mean to be really human in this context? These are issues where the Christian perspective is really useful, and we can develop some thoughts. The whole issue of equity in academia is really topical. There's a lot of interest in this. I think it's important for Christians to be part of that conversation as well. The ethical use of research. So I'm on a research ethics committee at my institute, and so I can have some input in the kinds of research that gets done or the kind of questions that get asked about research. Most directly in terms of evangelism and the kind of public events I'm interested in is trying to create spaces where people can ask questions, can explore Christian faith. So on the left, when one of my previous positions, I was in Munich for a few years, I set up this series of talks called God in the Pub, where we'd once a month or once every couple of months, we'd have a guest speaker and in a casual environment where it's easy to invite friends, they'd be talking about some connection between their research and their faith. This was actually organized largely for my church, but also in association with a group of Christian academics in Munich, trying to provide just a space where people can invite their colleagues from work, but also fellow students or postdocs or academic colleagues. The group where I'm involved on the campus where I work also once or twice or 3 times a year will have a public event for anyone who's interested on something somehow related to the science that we're doing on campus and Christian faith. So in this event that's here, I interviewed my friend Dr. Graham Finlay, who's written a lot on the top issues around science and faith. In general, I think a really helpful approach is common ground. I'm a really big fan of common grace, of the knowledge that God has revealed in creation and the knowledge that people as image bearers have been able to come to through their kind of everyday work. And so there's many areas of overlap between things we believe as Christians and things that our secular colleagues believe. And so my approach would very much be to start in some area of overlap between my interests and the interests of those around me. And I think a really natural way to do that for academics is to think through a Christian approach to whatever your area of research is. A couple more examples of events that we've had on the Genome campus. We had a talk on AI, ethics and faith from the head of the Faraday Institute here in Cambridge. This is a topic of massive interest, and so quite a few people came to that. Whenever we do one of these events, we actually get different people coming because people who are interested in that topic and would be intrigued to hear a Christian perspective. So each time we do an event, we might get, say, 50 or so people in person and a bunch online. Another topic on ethical issues to do with stem cell research, and I gave a talk on evolution and God a couple of years ago. So, concluding thoughts from all that. I think this idea of priesthood is really, really useful. I think as believers in Jesus, we're called to be priests in the world. We're called to represent Christ or present Christ to the people. And the priesthood that we've called to will be a blessing to those around us. It's not something that people necessarily realize, but in multiple ways, Christians can be a real blessing to their institutes or departments. So the witness of our lives includes living well in such a way which does tend to silence opposition. I've seen that in various cases. And taking the opportunities to proclaim the praises of God in creation and in redemption. Doing this isn't easy. It's not straightforward. It's not obvious how we should go about this, but it can be a real joy. And I'd really encourage you to think about doing this with other Christians you know around you. So on that, I look forward to questions and comments.